Well, good evening and welcome everyone to our own Encinitas historic La Paloma Theater. No better place to have a discussion, right? My name is Neil Hokanson. I'll be your moderator tonight. I've lived here since before Encinitas was a city and have met all the mayors, and I'm delighted to have that opportunity here today. I'd like to thank La Paloma Theater for providing this wonderful venue. Scott Chatfield, who's up in the box there doing the recording, who helped organize this event. Scott's got some friends here. Carol Wolf down here with the paddle. Hold up your paddle, Carol, is our timer. Thank you, Carol, for volunteering. And especially to our mayor, Tony Kranz, and our councilman, Bruce Ehlers, who got together over the weekend and sat down and said, what are the most important issues facing our city over the next few years? And they agreed together on what they would be. They paid for the venue. They want to have something a little different instead of one of these back and forth raucous debates where people talk about Glocks and hamburgers and stuff. We're going to do a deep dive on the questions that they selected as some of the biggest issues facing the city. And this is pretty unusual, I think, for people to do this, and it sets a good example for leadership and something I think we can all be very proud of in Encinitas. So let's thank both Bruce Ehlers and Tony Kranz. Here are the ground rules for tonight's discussion. Both people will have 2 minutes, both candidates, for opening remarks and 2 minutes for closing remarks. In between the 6 questions, 3 from Tony to Bruce and 3 from Bruce to Tony, I will ask on their behalf back and forth. They will then each have 3 minutes to address the issue at hand and 1.5 minutes to respond or rebut as they feel the need. We're following the League of Women Voters format. This is not an audience participation event, so we would all ask you to hold your applause or other emissions until the end of the evening. Let's see, what else do we have here? Questions. If there's time, we will open it up for questions. If there's not time, then Tony and Bruce will certainly be available outside on the sidewalk after the event. We do have a hard stop at 7:30. La Paloma has another event coming on at 8, so I would ask all of us to make our way outside at 7:30 because they need to get going on things. So with no further ado, opening remarks, we will start with Bruce.
Great. Hi, I'm Bruce Ehlers. I'm current city council member for District 4, and I'm running for mayor to return to our founding vision for Encinitas. Like many of you, I was attracted to Encinitas by our beautiful coast, small beach town ambiance, and overall quality of life, and the unique character of our 5 communities. This vision is why the city incorporated, and it should guide our decisions. Many people feel we've lost our way. I will return us to that vision. My qualifications include a resident of 40 years, I'm involved in city affairs for 25, council member, planning commissioner, and volunteer for many of those years. As mayor, I will vigorously defend our original vision, just as I have done for the last 2.5 decades. Recent decisions by the state and previous councils threaten this vision and irreversibly alter our community character. These poor decisions have included: 1, approving very large and out-of-character developments; 2, declaring parkland surplus and in anticipation of putting in more housing there; and 3, attempting to reverse the citizen-approved protections like Prop A. If you don't remember Prop A, the Encinitas Right to Vote initiative, it guarantees the right of voters to approve increases in residential height and density. I was the author of Prop A and spokesperson for the campaign when it passed in 2013. Since then, we've had 2 Prop A votes, and both have gone down in defeat. The voters denied these attempts by past councils to increase density and height. For each of these votes, I've been on the winning side with the majority of the voters. Then in 2020, a past mayor and council challenged Prop A in court. I provided key testimony and we won in court. Prop A remains in force. Prop A remains defending our city, and Prop A from out-of-touch mayors, councils, and the state was a key reason I chose to run for council in 2022, and that is why I'm now running for mayor. Thank you.
Let's do our best to try to hold it for the end at their request. Thank you. Tony?
Yes, good evening. My name is Tony Kranz, and I have the honor of serving as the mayor of the city of Encinitas. Prior to this term of serving as mayor, I spent 10 years as a city council member, and I'm very proud of many of the things that we have done over those 12 years. The city has focused a lot on addressing environmental issues, in addressing mobility issues, wrestling with the issues of housing and homelessness, and we will continue to do all of those things in my next term. I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to state housing laws, the city of Encinitas does not have a free pass to not comply with those laws. And this notion that the city was attempting to overturn Prop A is specious in that it was a requirement by the state, Housing and Community Development Department, to go to the court for what is known as declaratory relief for the requirement to vote on housing element updates. And that's because the state law on housing elements preempts the local control measure that the voters put in place. I would protect the Prop A right to vote initiative and will pledge to do that. The way that Prop A might need to be changed someday is by putting a question to the voters about some amendments to that. Because quite frankly, we're now faced with what is known as builder's remedy. And if we have a housing element that doesn't meet state requirements, projects that you wouldn't believe could show up in our city. If you think they're big now, builder's relief would really scare you. And so my goal as your mayor is to continue to be in compliance with state law so that we don't end up with projects like that. Thank you.
Sounds like housing might be on the docket tonight. This first question is from Bruce to Tony. Dear Tony, what is your position on local control of housing decisions, and how do you plan to fight state-mandated requirements?
Well, that is a good question given the climate up in Sacramento about adopting new laws regarding housing. It has been, they have been quite prolific in adopting laws that impose requirements on cities. What I think is important to understand as we explore this is that I have a long history of fighting for local control. In September of 2021, I initiated a council member item for the agenda that would protect local control and promote affordable housing, which were two of the goals that the council had, by fighting SB 9. And this council member initiated item, unfortunately, none of my colleagues would support it. The interesting part of that was that nobody else showed up to support my council member initiated item. Bruce wasn't there. There was one person who frequently is critical, but she was actually in support of this and applauded me for doing that. Another council member initiated item here, this one was not too much longer after that, January 19th, 2022, was to get the council to support our Neighborhood Voices initiative, which would have amended the state constitution and reestablished local control. I put this before the council looking for support from my colleagues, and unfortunately I got no support. There were two people that spoke in support that night. One of them was Bruce, and I appreciated him being there. The other one was Julie Thunder, and the interesting part is that this particular initiative never made it on the ballot. It ran into some serious headwinds. Bruce has been using that potential for a constitutional amendment to say that's how he's going to fight the state. The reality is, if there was a really good chance of that passing, it would have been on the ballot this year. he's listening to the people that run this initiative, and they're promising it'll be in 2026, it'll be ready to put on the ballot. I also have, some commentary in the Coast News. My record in terms of fighting for local control is strong. I was actually hoping that Bruce might have submitted some council member initiated items himself to promote local control. Or maybe he just would have wanted to talk to me about, hey, let's do this together, or let's do that together. Instead, all of a sudden, he's running for mayor, and he's, the king of local control. 2 years into the job, he's trying to sell you on this notion that he's going to fight. He's going to lobby harder. And I just think it's really important that we recognize that state the horses are out of the barn, and it's going to be really difficult and challenging to get them back in.
Bruce, housing decisions and local control.
Okay. Let me address several things that were said here. First, on the Our Neighborhood Voices. I obviously am very much a supporter of that. In fact, at the time we were collecting signatures, Tony took a stack of 200 packet for signatures, but at the end returned them with no signatures, including not even his own. Now, that says a lot right there. Not a single signature. So he may have been supporting it, but it was very, very lightly. Number two, let's talk about things we can do. One of the favorite clauses, or one of the favorite things I hear out of my opponent and out of other council members is our hands are tied. Well, of course they are, because you tied them. We have a legislative lobbying policy. Now, that is something set by the council, and they get to choose what they're going to lobby for. There is no state law that limits what we lobby. And we've had it in place since 2008. And along about 2019, the former mayor wrote a memo, and they took out the two local control bullets. One said oppose state mandates that take over our local control of our land use ordinances. The other one said we should oppose the intensification of what's called the California Density Bonus Law. It's another tool that's used for all these waivers you see in these big projects. And those got lined out in 2019, and they got replaced with support state legislation that helps us meet our state housing goal. And that basically is state control. And so that was in there for about 4 years. I got elected, and my opponent talked about what could I do. I came in and lobbied to get that memo that we get the lobbying policy reviewed that year. Normally, we review it in the beginning of the year. We didn't review it in March like we typically do. Didn't do it in April, May, June. I kept asking about it. Finally, along about September, October, I think it was October, we brought it into review. Now, this is heading into an election year. And so I brought that history. I said, hey, we had 10 years of this. We have local control, and then it went away. And I made the presentation, and all four of my colleagues voted for it. We restored the exact wording that had been in there. Now it's up to the mayor, and this is one reason I need to be mayor. The mayor controls what lobbying memos. He showed two memos. How many crazy laws have been coming out of the state? Dozens and dozens. I'll give you one that recently came up during that period where we weren't lobbying. It's called double density bonus, or second density bonus. And what it does, where we used to allow this density bonus, allows all these waivers and would allow 50% increase. By the way, that's 50% over 30 units per acre, our 30 unit per acre zoning, or 45 units per acre. It now allows over double, so you can go up to 60 units an acre if you meet the criteria for double or for second density bonus. That passed while we didn't have that lobbying policy in place. So that was step one. We need to get our house in order on what we lobby for. Oh, sorry.
Bruce, yeah, I'm going to stop you here. Tony, a minute and a half for your comments.
Yeah, we have a lobbyist, and city staff works with him based upon the stated priorities that we have for legislative purposes. There's nothing that keeps any member of the council from making the effort to identify bills that we should be opposing. And the ones that we have, I thought were appropriate for opposing, and in the end, Most of those, when you submit a letter opposing laws that are intended to address land use issues, they pass 40 to 3 and super overwhelming majorities. And so I just think that it's really important that this notion that we can just lobby harder and have an effect is not intellectually honest. So what we really need to do is work with the legislature to try and reduce the number of bills that get submitted. We need to keep our own house in order, because historically it's been, when Encinitas asked for some legislation, it was like, well, what are you guys doing here? You can't even get in line with the laws that we already have. So having a relationship with the legislature and legislators is really critical, and I think I provide that.
Bruce, minute and a half.
Yeah, several things. I've heard in previous debates that we've been sued by the state and lost. We have not. We just pulled a Public Records Act from the city. We've never been sued by the state. We have not, therefore, lost. Number 2 is our housing element is in compliance right now. Tony was bringing up builder's remedy as the boogeyman. We are in compliance. We do not have to worry about it until we are worry about builder's remedy until we are out of compliance. And then the last thing is I'd like to go into some of the other things I want to do. We should be coordinating with other cities. I'll give examples like Redondo Beach just won a lawsuit over SB 9. So the very item that Tony wrote a lobbying effort against, they won. They're a charter city, and they won. It'll go on appeal, I'm sure. But we need to be coordinating with the many, many dozens of other cities statewide that are opposed to the same egregious, overstepping policies that the state is forcing on us. And then the last thing I would say is that these are all unfunded mandates, and that is contrary to our current Constitution. I think there's a legal challenge we could mount there with other cities.
All right. We're going to go on to our next question. This is Tony's question for Bruce. Dear Bruce, how do you plan to tackle the city's growing homeless population and meet the need for affordable housing here in Encinitas?
Boy, this happens all the time. I see people conflate affordable housing and homelessness. They are two completely different actually, items. From the books I've read and talking to the head of Alpha Project here in San Diego, who's been doing it for 35 years, about a third of the homeless population is sober and falls into categories like transition. They lost their house and a family, or they're juveniles, or they're battered women. And they are people that are willing to take services, and they do. And you don't see them out on the streets here for the most part. They will go get services as soon as they're contacted. But it's the two-thirds. The two-thirds, or 70% if you read San Francisco, the book, that are suffering from both a substance use disorder and a severe mental illness. That's the vast majority of the population out there. That's the problem we're seeing, and that's the problem we need to address. Building more housing will not get them off the streets. We offer them beds, we offer them food and services, and they do refuse it. The head of Alpha Project calls the very few, the small portion of that two-thirds that will accept services, he calls them unicorns, because they just are so rare, and we need to get beyond that. So really, building housing or building more affordable housing will not solve those problems. And the interesting thing about some of these laws we're talking about, density bonus and SB 9, there's no requirement for low-income housing. So for the additional few units they have to do, they generally get to double count the baseline that they have to do called inclusionary housing. And then they get density bonus with a handful, 1 or 2, but they get to count the original ones they did, double count, I should say. And now with second density bonus, they get to triple count. So we're not producing the extra numbers that we should. And as a result, we build quite a few market rate houses, roughly 6 times the number of market rate houses for every affordable unit. And so my question back to Tony is, how many more $1 million condos do we have to build to solve homelessness? They're not connected.
Tony, 3 minutes.
Right, and it wasn't an issue that was intended to be conflated, but homelessness, frankly, it's pretty clear they need a roof over their head. And so what we've been doing to address homelessness, we adopted a homeless action plan several years ago, and we've been executing on that plan. We have addressed some of the concerns that the community has by doubling the number of sheriff's deputies that we have working to address homelessness. We have a second social worker that we've hired at the city, and we now have a partnership with Vista for the Buena Creek Navigation Center, which is a shelter essentially for transitional housing. We put people in touch with the services that they need, which include frequently drug, substance abuse treatment, as well as mental health treatment. So I tend to agree with his percentages, but in particular, the 33% that don't have either substance abuse or mental health issues, getting them back under shelter is really critical. There is no question that one of the problems we have is that some of the chronically homeless are service resistant, as it's called. So we have recently been stepping up our efforts to make them less inclined to resist, to deny, to turn down the offer of help through either the shelter or county services that are available to them. And it has made a difference. We were able to do that as a result of a Supreme Court decision that gave the Sheriff's Department a little more ability to remove people from public places where they were not allowed to sleep. So we need to continue with our humane effort to address homelessness, and part of that is to make sure that there is an opportunity for housing, some of which happens through the Section 8 voucher program. There are voucher programs that the city could be using. I think that's probably the direction that we should be heading for our affordable housing program, is to increase the number of vouchers that we make available to people. We also want to try and address the issue of homelessness by keeping people who maybe are living from paycheck to paycheck, who need a little bridge to get through a couple of months so that they don't become homeless. And that, I think, is a critical part of what the city could be doing to help. And frankly, we have our social workers who are keeping in touch with people. We have the faith-based community. There are a number of really good organizations that are working on the streets. Philabelli is feeding the homeless, and there are a number of other social service agencies that are prepared to help in this issue. And so I'm proud of the work that the city has done on that.
Bruce, 1.5 minutes.
Yeah. So I support the public-private groups that we've got that are addressing. I think they're doing a very good job. As I pointed out earlier, I don't think you see that 1/3, the sober 1/3, out there on the streets. We get them to services. I support the additional resources the city has put in place, be it the Buena Creek Navigation Center. I voted for it. I believe that they deserve a roof over their heads. My problem is that people that refuse services, we need to get them to get services. They have to. So things like Prop 47 that took away the judge's ability to basically require the person breaking the law to either get drug treatment or go to jail. That got taken away, so I support Prop 36 that would restore that, so we can actually have some motivation for these people to go get treatment and get sober and get back to normal living, to being housed in normal living. There's something that I firmly believe, that if a person refuses the services that we offer, and we offer them to every one of the homeless we encounter, our HOPE team does that. If they refuse that service, they actually have some obligation to follow our laws. And what I'm asking, and I think we're somewhat in agreement here, is that we continue to enforce the laws. That you're not allowed to camp overnight, defecate in public, et cetera. We need to enforce those. So.
Tony?
Yes, and I tend to agree that Bruce and I are on the same page. We've had a number of agenda items that got updates for our homeless action plan, and he never proposed any changes to that. And in almost all cases, we've proceeded in lockstep, and that includes hiring 2 new sheriff's deputies and a social worker. So it's been, I think, a good indicator of our ability to work together, and I hope to be able to continue to work together very well with him when I get reelected.
Next question. This is a question from Bruce for Tony. Tony, do you support developing the city-owned property on 634 Quail Gardens Drive, also known as L7, as affordable housing, as a park, or some other use? Tony?
I oppose developing it as a residential development, and have led the council in keeping it from being on the housing element. It was a very difficult process of deliberation. There were a number of people who supported including that in our housing element update. Obviously, there were a significant number who opposed it as well. And at one point, I had lost the argument. We did have a council member that changed his vote and came out to support keeping the housing element out of the update that we did. And I think that was very important. And one of the main reasons that I think it's necessary to not build housing there is because of the significant number of housing units that are going in the Quail Gardens Drive corridor, on both ends of Quail Gardens at Leucadia Boulevard as well as Encinitas Boulevard. So the idea of adding any additional housing, even if it's developed at R1, I think is something that we should avoid. The city owns that property, controls that property. It was purchased in 1998 as a park, and it has been essentially a political football ever since. The first time it was proposed for something other than a park, it was, there was an effort to move the library over there. I got involved in that campaign, and overwhelmingly the voters said, leave the library on the hill where it is, which was to me great because that was where I had my memories of it, going to the library and the round building there. And so the next was as a part of the failed effort by the Eckies to convert some of their more of their ag property into residential housing, which was going to involve a land swap with 10 acres on Saxony for this L7 property, and since the measure didn't pass, that never happened. And then it got into the mix as part of our original housing element update, which started in 2015. So what has happened over the last few years is that there's been an effort by the council to identify a site for the city to be involved in developing housing so that we might be able to have an 100% affordable project and thereby address the requirements of affordable housing that the state has imposed upon us more effectively than the 20% that we generally get from those sites. And to me, I'm a believer in transit-oriented development, so I would prefer that if we were to look at a site that it would be closer to the railroad, and we happen to own a very nice piece of land here that could be redeveloped. So for a project that is 100% affordable, I think we should be looking here to our property here on Vulcan.
Bruce, 3 minutes.
Yeah, so you have a strange way of opposing putting housing on there. And I pulled the minutes from each of the discussions we've had. One of them, Tony actually proposed an addendum to the motion that would propose 60 units on the property in more of a single building. But okay, I'm the only council member who has voted consistently, all 4 votes, to oppose the declaring L7 surplus and converting it into housing. I've been very consistent, very vocal on that. My reasons are varied and several. The land was bought back in 1998 with park funds for park use. The land is needed now as a park more than ever and will be needed even more in the future as these 1,100 units right along the Quail Gardens corridor get built and occupied. They're not even occupied yet, and we're giving away 9.5 acres, or not giving away, we're reallocating 9.5 acres of parkland for potentially housing. The city made a similar mistake with the Olevenheim firehouse long ago, and now we're actually looking and considering sites almost right next door to where we originally owned the land, and I don't want to repeat that mistake. I don't want to be part of that. The other problem I have with this is using 9.5 acres for 45 units is a highly inefficient way to do it. The cost of that land is, looking at neighboring land that is sold, it runs about $1 million or $2 million an acre. That's about $20 million in land costs. If you go through the financial analysis that the city had Cosmont do, they did not take into account the cost of land. But if you divide the cost of that land plus the actual construction costs, we're going to be about 50% higher than building the very same type of project somewhere else on closer to an acre or two of land. So it's a highly inefficient use of our money, our capital, our assets. And so each one of these reasons, in my opinion, is enough to kill it. And if we have a new council, I will work hard to take this off. The other issue, and I talked about this earlier, is we are in compliance. Builder's remedy is not a problem. Where this could become a problem is if we end up building and running out of our buffer of low-income units, but we're not there yet, so we have time to do the right thing. And so I make sure I got all my, Tony brought up Proposition H, to move the library. I signed on the opposition side, so I opposed Prop H. And we won, we defeated Prop H, and the library did not move. So I actually signed my name on the ballot initiative. So I'm very familiar with that. And I want to keep this parkland.
Tony, a minute and a half.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've learned to do over the dozen years that I've been serving is read the room. And if it was Bob Bondi, excuse me, not Bob Bondi, James Bond, who was famous for saying, all you got to do, be able to do as a council member is count to three. Because when you have 3 votes, then you're going to move forward with whatever it is that you've proposed. And there were 3 votes to move forward with a study, an analysis of developing L7 at the ridiculous 45 units that Bruce mentioned, and I don't think that's a good use of the city's asset. And so I was looking at least to do an analysis of a senior apartment complex that would include 60 units. 60 units in a senior apartment complex would also require a Prop A vote, which is what I think would be appropriate. The current proposal to develop the 45 units would not require a vote. It would be developed at the existing density, and I didn't think that was in the best interest. And ultimately, the goal was to get a financial analysis that would end the speculation about whether it was worth building 45 units on that property.
Bruce?
Yeah, so I think you heard it from him. He did propose the 60 units. Housing. That means no park. So the other thing is with the 45 units, the way the land was declared surplus, and I'm getting a little wonky here, but the way it was declared surplus, 80% had to be used for the housing. So it's not like you could push all the housing to one corner. You had to use 80% of that land for housing, and you could use the 2 acres or so, or an acre, I guess it is, acre and a half, for a park, but you're not going to get the same kind of park. So the mechanism the council chose to go down, the mechanism that Tony voted for, like I said, I'm the only one that voted no each and every time.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. The next question is a question from Tony for Bruce. In light of our state mandatory housing laws, is it time to consider making adjustments to Proposition A, the right to vote amendment passed in 2013?
So Proposition A actually followed the old general plan pretty cleanly, with one exception. The old general plan actually required a vote of the people on any upzoning. That was from 1989 on in the general plan. It had an exception, though. It had an exception if 4/5 of the council voted, made a finding of public benefit, they could bypass the vote of the people. And of course, what happened? The dozen or so times that we have had upzonings, that's exactly what happened. I remember one example in particular where what the mayor at the time said, oh, it's additional housing, that's a public benefit. And I didn't think that the public felt the same way. They want to see a public benefit come along with the additional housing, a new park or some other thing. They want that development to fund more. It could be low-income housing. There needs to be public benefit, and if we're going to change the zoning. Zoning is a community right. And so the Prop A team, and it turned out to be the majority of the people, thought the same. And so we enacted Prop A in 2013. So the second thing was when we got sued, actually it was before that, there were a couple of lawsuits, one by Building Industry Association of San Diego, you know where their motivation is, and the other was by Tenants United against the city. Both these were against the city. The city was fighting, said they were going to support Prop A and defend Prop A, but it became very obvious to us that that was not true, but unfortunately about a year afterwards, after it started. And we tried to intervene, which is a legal mechanism where you can get status in the lawsuit, and the judge said we weren't timely. So the judge, and I went to the hearing, and Tony was there and quite a few other people, the judge was very clear that the plaintiff, the city, or the two plaintiffs, and then the city were both in agreement. We were at an impasse. Now, we as citizens and proponents of Prop A were not in agreement. And he gave a very measured one-time out on that. And he made it very clear that this is not you can't come back to this well. That the citizens' right to initiative is a state constitutional right of the citizens, and he respected that. So the bottom line is that happened, and that's how you got the 15 properties upzoned. And I don't think we're at an impasse. I think the citizens, if they're given a true deal where there is a public benefit, will vote for this. And I think we should continue keeping Prop A as it is. I don't see that we need to change it.
Tony, 3 minutes. Is it time to amend Prop A?
So Bruce misremembers a lot of that history there with the lawsuits between the BIA and Tenants United. We actually settled that by saying we will go to the people with a housing element update that they can vote on, and that's the settlement agreement that we made. And the plan that we put to the voters, they rejected. It's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, though. You put 15 parcels on a map and ask the community to vote to approve it, and it's really going to be very difficult to get to that point. And part of the reason we have so many parcels is because we were so far behind on the housing element requirements. We had never had an approved housing element. So he's right. We went before the judge and basically said, Judge, we had this vote and it failed, and what are we to do? And the judge, as Bruce mentions, gave the voters one more bite at the apple, and those were his exact words. And so what did we do? We put together a task force to design a housing element that could pass the voters. Bruce was part of that task force. I was on that. New mayor Catherine Blakespeare was on that. And it was one of those things that we all set about coming up with a plan that would work. In the end, after making a trip to Sacramento and talking with Housing and Community Development Department and looking at a bunch of different ways that we could approach this, whether we keep it 2 stories and go out, or whether we make it 3 stories, and reduce the number of parcels, those were all things that we had to take into consideration. There were other community factors. Bottom line is that Prop A was a significant hurdle. And when Bruce talks about the lawsuit, the suits, the legal battles that we fought, I have never said that we were sued by the state. We were sued by plaintiffs that knew that we were not in compliance with state law. And we've spent millions of dollars on attorneys addressing those lawsuits, which has been a significant waste of money. But back to Prop A. A couple of things about Prop A that I think would be good to have. One is, just like Solana Beach, they have a right to vote on upzoning, but one little line in there says that the city, if there are any, this provision shall not apply to amendments which are necessary to comply with state or federal law, which are necessary to implement or obtain certification of any programs. And that's the challenge we have with no net loss, which could trigger a 180-day clock. And you cannot put together a plan for upzoning and put it to the voters in 180 days. And at the end of 180 days, you'll have developers that have builders remedy projects at the planning counter.
Bruce?
So it's interesting, the fear that I don't understand how a council can say, well, I don't trust the people to vote. You know, if you put a deal in front of the people, they'll say no automatically, where council is somehow smarter. I don't agree with that. I think we need to put deals in front of the voters that have that public benefit. I talked about it earlier. It can't be just simply a gift to the developers, which is what both Measure T in 2016, the first one we defeated, and Measure U in 2018. I did get on that task force. The task force was made up of me, the only no on T person there. We won in the election. And 3 people, Tony, Catherine Blakespeare, and Kurt Grosclose, were all yes on T. And I thought the other thing was, when it came in front of the council and we actually joined the council up on the dais, I had no voting power. I was already at a small minority up there, but when we got in front of the council and started discussing the issues, it just veered right back to Measure T, or mimicking Measure T. I, in fact, have a side-by-side comparison of U and T, and they look almost identical. And so when the same result occurred, I was not surprised. Ultimately, I have the faith in the people to vote to do the right thing for the city of Encinitas and for low-income housing. I believe that's unique about Encinitas. We do support low-income housing, but we're not going to build enough for everyone to live here that can't afford to live here.
Tony?
Yes, and I trust the voters as well, and I think that the next time we're having to update our housing element, there will be a significant difference in our likelihood of success, because we will have many fewer parcels on that map, would be my expectation. Again, we were making up for a lot of lost time. We were well behind in any of the requirements that we had. But the issue of Prop A and addressing some of the potential changes, I think it's really critical for the council, whether it's led by Bruce or me, to have the ability to adopt a housing element that keeps us in compliance with the law, because builders remedy projects are not what we want to deal with. And you know, the other thing that's kind of interesting about the Prop A, it was sold as a right to vote on upzoning, but it had all sorts of other kind of strange things in it. One of them was to remove a technique in development known as cut and fill. And we're going to be considering a project on appeal that is over there. It's called Quail Meadows. It's just to the north of Sunshine Gardens. And that project at one time had 36 single-family homes approved, and because Prop A passed, those single-family homes couldn't be built because cut and fill was no longer allowed. So it ended up many years later on our housing element update, when if Prop A hadn't had this kind of strange non-right to vote issue on it, we wouldn't have the problem with that project.
Thank you, Tony. Next question. This will be important to some of you that live in Leucadia. This is a question from Bruce for Tony. What are your solutions and priorities with respect to the storm flooding and drainage issues in Leucadia?
Well, the pipe that we're putting in the ground is going to go a long ways to addressing the issues of flooding in Leucadia. The capacity that that pipe will be able to carry is significant and will, I think, go a long ways towards alleviating many of the problems. We've also recently, through my initiative, worked with the city manager to put in place a new protocol that involves pumping water that's on the east side of the railroad tracks that comes down Orpheus and goes through a pipe, and it's kind of a winding road to get to the Bataquitos Lagoon from basically Orpheus. Instead, we're turning a lot of that water around and putting it in a new pipe that I was responsible for putting in place as part of this first segment of streetscape that we built. And the funding that I provided as part of the council was critical for that pipe. It's 24 inches, and it has enough capacity to take a lot of the water that's currently overloading the pipe, the 24-inch pipe that goes north. So between those two things, I think we're making a big dent. But ultimately, the most important part of addressing flooding in Leucadia was my initiative to get a study done by Q3, which is a consultancy that looked at the entire watershed of western Leucadia. And there have been 4 quadrants that have been identified as needing a particular project that would take a lot of the load off of each segment. So one would be on Vulcan and take water south to Cottonwood Creek, and the other would be on the west side of the railroad tracks in the neighborhood that's west of 101. That would be another segment. And then another very important segment is north of Leucadia Boulevard on the Vulcan side of the railroad tracks. And so the cost to develop that particular project is about $50+ million, a significant project. And so the challenge of finding the funding to build that pipe system is going to be very difficult. It's one of the reasons why Measure K is on the ballot, and I fully support it, is because the only way to get that built in a reasonable period of time is with an additional tranche of money and that would be brought by that 1-cent sales tax. The other measure that I think, the other ballot proposition that I think you want to support is Proposition 4, which has $10 billion statewide for stormwater facility. It's got a number of initiatives in it, and several of them I think the city could qualify to obtain funding for.
Bruce, flooding in Leucadia, you have 3 minutes.
So what a difference a year makes. I think it was in January of this year when on Channel 7 News, the mayor was out there and literally said there's no money to fit, while standing in front of the mud house and the alley right there, said on TV, there's no money to fix Leucadia flooding. It's not a priority. And if you want to go ask the owner, Emma, the owner of Mud House, she remembers it too. When I first got on the council, a year and a half, 2 years ago now, the first thing I did is, geez, it's about time we fixed Leucadia flooding. So I went and started compiling all the reports, and I talked to Gary Murphy, who knows flooding. If you want to know about flooding in Leucadia, he's the guy to talk to. I got every report, read through them. I agree, the Q3 report is the right one. Tom Ryan's the engineer and author. I've talked to him many a time, and he has a blueprint to solve a 100-year storm for all the different sumps, most of the sumps, not every last one, but most of the major sumps all around Leucadia, basically west of the I-5. And it cost about $51 million was the number that we got earlier this year, and that's about $5 million a year for 10 years. And just to put it in an order of magnitude, that's less than it's going to cost for Leucadia streetscape. So we had a choice we could have made 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We could have addressed the flooding first. So I want to talk about an item that came before council about funding segment C of streetscape. And that came earlier this year, and on the same item, we had gotten $4 million that we were going to contract out to put the 60-inch pipe. You probably saw those big 60-inch pipes down on the 101. We were going to put it, but $4 million would only cover 1/3 of segment C. So starting from La Costa, not even up to, I think, around, I forget the first street there. And we were going to also contract $20 million for the surface work. Well, that left 2/3 of segment without any 60-inch pipe. Presumably, we're going to come back within a year or 2 or 5 and put in that 60-inch pipe. Well, the 60-inch pipe is 30 feet down. And if you've seen the amount of digging that has to go, a lot of that surface work would have been destroyed. And it was on our consent calendar, meaning that it was routine in nature. I pulled it. The mayor accused me of playing politics. I wasn't. I was trying to save real money. Two-thirds of $20 million or some portion of that. That's millions of dollars. And that's important to me because it goes a long way towards fixing drainage. And in the end, I offered a compromise, and we were able to move the pipes under the more expensive segment, and then the mayor did go out subsequently and find enough money along with staff, and we then appropriated that money to now that the pipe will, but if I had not pulled it, we would have just gone on our merry way and not gotten that pipe under there.
Tony?
Bruce has got quite a memory of these things that aggrandizes himself. There was really nothing to what he's saying about this notion that we weren't doing it the right way. The contract was already prepared to be approved. We had had numerous conversations on this project. And the reality is that the engineers at the meeting didn't note the answer to the question, which was, in fact, that they had bid the job with the big pipes going in the areas of the roundabout. And the city we had already, on May 19th, 2021, ordered that the staff change this project so that it was only essential infrastructure. So everything on the east side of Highway 101 was already going to be bare bones. And so the idea that we could come back later and put in a pipe in the ground in that side, the northbound side of the 101, was part of the plan. And I knew going in, we had done additive alternatives in the bidding process, so we knew what it was going to take to put in the whole segment of pipe, and I knew once we got started, we were going to find the money to build that whole pipe, and we are.
Bruce?
Yeah, so this is a case where if you go back and watch the tape, and I'll have to put it up on my website, you can see it for yourself. This is all on tape, and that's not the way it went down. In fact, after the meeting, Tony said to me, oh, we're just going to move the pipe right away and run it along NCTD, which is not in any of the Q3 reports. It's not in any report written anywhere. When I talked to the engineers, they said, we didn't know about that. You can't. I'm a firm believer in doing the public business in the public forum. You'll hear my votes. I'll say why I'm voting. You'll hear me out there. I do everything in the public forum. This case, none of this came out that night. It should have been out there because all 5 of the council members up there have equal votes. It doesn't always seem that way up there, but we all have equal votes, and we all should be operating off the exact same information. Very clearly, if you go watch that tape that night, none of what the mayor just said came out, was not said. That's unacceptable from a mayor, and that's why I need to be mayor.
Tony, I get the sense you'd like a minute on this one?
Yeah.
And then Bruce.
I hope he posts that video because that's crazy. I said to the engineers myself, you mean we're not putting the pipe under the roundabouts? Because that, I would agree with Bruce. It would be insane to come back and tear out the roundabout to put in the pipe. That would be ridiculous. No, there was never any talk. I didn't talk to him after the meeting about putting it in the right of way of the NCTD because that would be nuts too. And, you know, the reality is that the engineers made a mistake. At the meeting, they said they're going to have to look it up and understand it better. And I was not surprised when they came back and said, we bid the job to put the pipe in the ground under the roundabout. So, you know, it's really pretty amazing to hear him making this stuff up. It's unfortunate that he's doing it that way. The reality is that we have gone a long way to make sure that this essential project, which is putting sidewalks along the west side of 101 in areas where there currently are no sidewalks. It's putting stormwater facilities so that the water drains from the road. And this notion that it's not essential is just crazy.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think he's agreeing that there was only money to do 1/3 of the pipe under the whole segment C, which was my problem. It wasn't until after the meeting, and there was no discussion that we're going to go find the money at the meeting. Again, I will put the tape up there and put a link to that video for that night. But I was there. I've talked to people since then. Again, I talked to staff afterwards about it, and they agree with what I said. So, good news is that's why I love having public record, having videotape record of what we do up there. It's amazing what you can find. It's kind of like the L7. It was bought with park funds for park use, and it's because we have those records, we can hold the council and the mayor accountable. Please do so. Please watch the tape.
Next question. This is a question from Tony for Bruce. The phrase essential infrastructure has been bandied about quite a bit. Since there isn't money to do everything, certainly not all at once, exactly what do you consider to be essential infrastructure? Bruce?
Yeah, essential infrastructure, basic essential infrastructure is that which the city is primarily responsible for. That would be pavement, that would be drainage, that would be sewer, that would be water. It would also be public safety in the form of fire department and police. That is what the primary purview and the primary job of our city, and we need to do that first. We shouldn't be doing beautification and vanity projects, and I include streetscape is primarily a beautification. It's got some drainage components, but it didn't have the underground drainage component that it should have. We should have done the underground first. Doing it simultaneously at the last minute, okay, but I would have rather had that all planned and budgeted. This is all about budgeting and money. It's where our money gets spent. I think we'll all agree that digging up something you just built on the surface to put in additional drainage down below was wrong. That's the wrong order. I call it ready, shoot, aim. No, we want to go ready, aim, shoot. And so that's what you'll get with me as mayor.
Tony?
Well, in fact, the project that we're talking about up there in the north is not a beautification project. It is an essential infrastructure project. It, as I mentioned, is putting in sidewalks for the first time. It's addressing mobility issues. It's removing stormwater that has plagued that part of town for a long time. And there's no question that the right way to do it is all at the same time. And that's why we bid it with additive alternatives, and that we would work to come up with the money. And the way it happened is that we had the budget money all set up for this first segment and just a short stretch of pipe. And I knew that our goal was going to be to continue that conversation about finding some more money to build the rest of the pipe. It all happened in public. It all happened with agendized items. People knew to come speak to their objections about moving money from one item, which was the roundabout at Leucadia, for example. We emptied that bucket. There were several other projects that got emptied in order to have the money to build the project. But ultimately, this was about coming up with a strategy that addresses the essential infrastructure needs. Another essential infrastructure item is beach access. And so the idea that Beacon's staircase was killed by Bruce as a planning commissioner was really disappointing, because we have now had that beach closed a couple of times because the trail is, there have been slides on the trail. So we do need to focus on our shoreline and maintaining beach access. We need to have fire stations. We now have Station 1 that's been closed because of unreinforced masonry. We've got Station 6 that we're renting a building. There's a lot of really important essential infrastructure, and it's been a focus of mine for a dozen years. And it is slow doing city work, but believe me, the pipe that's going in the ground up in northwest Leucadia didn't happen overnight, and it didn't have anything to do with his pulling it from the consent calendar, the contract from the consent calendar. That was years of effort on my part to advance that. Q3 did a study. We moved it to engineering and design. We got the environmental clearances. We got the permitting all up to date. And when it came time to pull the trigger on the contract, we had the additive alternatives that we could fund in order to put that pipe in the ground. I'm very proud of the fact that it's going in the ground. That is something that has vexed the city for 25 plus years, and it's long overdue, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing to get it done.
Bruce?
Yeah, so this is another one of those cases where he talks about me making things up. Wow. Again, I'm going to go back to, remember the news story and talk to Emma. He was saying that it's not a priority. And in fact, I work closely with Gary, and in fact, I went down and I would talk to staff that was out, they were out running the pumps. They literally said they hadn't seen a council member out there. But I started going every rainy season, every rain, I would be out there, up and down Leucadia, looking at what was going on. The idea of pumping underneath and into the pipe, that was actually, Gary Murphy and I came up with that. We let him join it because we needed his help to get it done, but it proved in that third rainfall of this season, this last season, that that we didn't even have to turn the pumps on. The city didn't have to turn the pumps on at Leucadia Park. In other words, getting that's where the water naturally flows, is to Moonlight. But we were artificially, through the current process and piping and operation of valves, we were sending it all the way 1.7 miles north to Ponto. Beach access, yes, I did fight the, what was it called? The Las Vegas Skyway to the beach, which was like 12 feet above. It was $5 million, what a waste of money. But I will point out that the council came right along with that. It got appealed to council, and they also killed it. And I stand by that. I like the natural trail down, much prefer that. I don't think we need a huge, obscene structure in addition to the path down.
Tony?
Yeah, you misremembered that too, that never came to the council on appeal. Nobody appealed it. But also, what he also forgets is that it was a second iteration that was not that objectionable, and it provided the beach access and a staircase. So it's you know, once again, he's misremembering stuff. The fact is that I spent a lot of time at the pump station. I know I saw Councilmember Blackwell there as well. So Bruce is not the only one that has shown concern for the issues related to stormwater. And you know, it's a fact. I've been in the middle of trying to address stormwater issues in Leucadia for my entire service on the council, and that includes the recent effort to pump the water to the south. And I'm proud of that effort. It's proving to be a very cost-effective solution for now, but ultimately we need that 50 million plus service. The other thing, he keeps talking about the TV interview at the Mud House. What I basically said was that that the pipe that we're putting in does not address a 100-year storm. And that is true. I didn't say, you know, we couldn't afford it. And what I was saying is that this one pipe is not going to solve all the flooding in Leucadia. You got to have the 4 segments. And so we got to keep working on this. And it's a big bill. It's $50 million plus in order to get the 100-year storm capacity of the stormwater system that we need.
Thank you, gentlemen. Those are our 6 questions. It's Q&A time. I would ask that any questions be respectful. Stand up when you speak and say it loud enough, and I will repeat. Go ahead.
My question is directed at Mayor Kranz. I believe just last week you put L7 on your list of recommended properties to go to the council for upzoning for housing.
So the question is around L7 being upzoned for housing by Mr. Kranz. Tony?
Well, I believe you're talking about the Affordable Housing Task Force work, which is where we are looking at every piece of property that the city owns, which includes L7. And we've scored each of them using a rubric, and believe it or not, L7 was at the lowest score level of all of the city properties.
But your score was 57.5, and the cutoff line is 50.
Well, so in the end, the city properties that are higher than that are going to be the projects that we focus on if it comes out the way that I expect this Affordable Housing Task Force report to work. But we couldn't just ignore the fact that L7 is a city property. And so, you know, in the end, what we're looking for is, from my perspective, a project that is transit-oriented development, and there are way higher, better, highest, best use purpose, and so L7 is not one that I expect to come to the top.
Bruce, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really, I was trying to figure out when Councilmember Blackwell and Tony seconded the motion for this housing element task force, and I thought it was unique that, or what's the word, happenstance, that it would finish right after the election. And I thought, wow, isn't that a coincidence? And, you know, the fact they're going out and looking, and the first thing I see is all of these parks. The very thing I'm against is we're considering parks, and it's just, it makes no sense. And again, I'm going to go back to, we have a compliant housing element. We are not facing today a no net loss issue, we're not facing builder's remedy. Tony keeps bringing that up as the boogeyman, trying to scare people into action now. I agree in good planning. The trouble we ran into, we had 15 properties with several thousand units available, and we made it so lucrative because it was such a giveaway to those developers. What happened? 12 out of the 15 started developing right away. Fox Point Farms is in process. You'll see Baldwin Hills is going through the process. Sunshine, 1967 is almost, I think it is done actually. There have been quite a few projects that hurried through. So what happened is we burned down our backlog. If we had a little more balance in there, this was supposed to take, that buffer was supposed to last 8 years, the entire 6th cycle housing element. Instead, we're going through it in about 2.5 years, although we're now hitting some projects that are less lucrative, and they're going to take longer to get out. So we may hit a trough here or a flat part, and we may not have a problem until we get to the 7th housing cycle in 2029.
Tony?
But we have time to plan.
Tony, any further comments here?
Yeah, so what he fails to mention is that new state law required that parcels that go on the housing element update had to have developer interest. So they had to write a letter saying we're ready to develop, or that parcel couldn't go on the map. The other thing that the state required is that 50% of the parcels had to be vacant. So it had to be ready to develop without having to worry about displacing any tenants or anything like that. So these were all new rules that the state adopted between the Measure T housing element update and the Measure U. And so even though he was on the Affordable Housing the Housing Element Task Force, all of that was well known as part of that process. So I'm surprised he doesn't remember that. But in the end, the requirements for the Housing Element Update were pretty clear and made clear to the public that this was going to be a situation that there would be development that came out of this plan. And then finally, the Affordable Housing Task Force work that we're doing is very important. I think it is critical that we get ahead of the issue of no net loss, which is a law that we were very close to triggering, except for the fact that the Greek Orthodox Church was willing to commit to their market rate units being rented at affordable. That's what kind of saved us in that. But we're very close to triggering no net loss, which would mean 180 days we have to have more parcels upzoned in order to comply with state law.
Bruce, further comment?
Yeah, just a quick one. One, I do remember all this, of course, because I was I've been a planning commissioner for so long, and I was on the task force and was very versed in this. This all comes down to a funding issue, and it's really a question of where that subsidy, remember I talked about the $500,000, $400,000 per unit subsidy? It's where is that going to come from? And whether we're building, whether we're picking a new park to convert or whether we're buying new land, it all comes down to just always, rule of thumb, about $500,000 per unit subsidy is what the city will have to ante up. And so if we're going to do 50 houses, 40 houses, that's going to, 50 houses will be $25 million that the city will have to come up with. And that's really what this is. It's all about funding, and it's all about the state foisting unfunded mandates on the cities and on the local jurisdictions.
Tony, do you want any final word on this?
No, I agree that it is unfunded mandates, and it's unfortunate. Not only the unfunded mandates for the cost of the housing, but other mitigation that's required to address issues, the impacts of development. So I think Bruce and I are on the same page with regard to that.
Okay, let's take another question. Yeah, back in the back there. Stand up if you would.
I have a question for both candidates. What will you do as mayor to make our streets and roads safer for pedestrians and bicycle riders?
Did you both hear that?
Yep.
What would you do to make the road safer for pedestrians and bicycle riders? Bruce, why don't you start this time?
Boy, we've been doing a lot, almost to the exclusion of any vehicles. Part of the problem is that I count all the time. I'm all for safe riding, and quite frankly, I think some of the green paint is 30 years overdue, so I'm happy to see it. But some of the changes we've made, I don't agree with. I don't agree that we need to be eliminating, they call them lane diets. I tend to call them lane-ectomies. Lane-ectomies are where you take away a lane. I see that as a last resort, and I really don't support it in general. I supported the lower speed limits because you get down into the lower speed limits and the injuries for pedestrians or bicyclists when they do have an altercation with a car significantly drops. So I can see slower speeds as a solution. I'm all for traffic calming, be it stop signs, chicanes, speed tables, whatever we have to do there. Where we can afford it. Roundabouts are good. It's not the solution everywhere, and they're expensive, unfortunately. Stop signs are cheap. Roundabouts, can be $1 million or $2 million. Let's see. Beyond that, we live in a car-centric society still. I have data from a Southern California area government survey done for 15 years that shows car ownership has increased significantly, 1.7 cars per household up to 2.4 over from 2000 to 2015. Cars are not going away. And now we're also adding density, more people. That means more cars, not less cars. So the need for vehicle lanes is not going away. We can wish it would, but it's not. And so I support maintaining our vehicle lanes, but doing infrastructure like we've done with some of the green striping and et cetera to make bicycling and pedestrian safer.
Tony, bicycle and pedestrian safety.
Yeah, it's always been a priority. We've accomplished a lot in the city, and we will continue to work to implement what is known as complete streets, which is where there's room for cars, there's room for bicyclists, and there's room for pedestrians, and each to feel safe. It isn't easy to implement complete streets in an auto-centric world, and so the critical work is not only about the infrastructure, but also in the attitudes and how we can help people to better understand the safe way to use these facilities. And it is, we've had some tragedies in our community. It really is really heartbreaking what we've seen over the last dozen years or so. But I think that the work that we're doing is going a long ways towards making our roadways safer for all modes of travel. It is critical that we continue to make it safer for the cyclists and the pedestrians, because our goal should be to allow people to choose to get out of their car, to choose to leave their car at home. They will still have a car, but if they leave it at home, that means that there's an additional parking space for you. And so we definitely want to continue to improve safety and make that a priority. And I think that, it doesn't, you go by any of the schools nowadays, you see the young kids with the e-bikes, and each one of those e-bikes represents 4 cars movements that didn't have to be made because parents didn't have to take those kids to school. And so we want to encourage it, but we definitely need to address the safety issue and get our young people trained on how to be safe on those bikes.
Thank you, gents. Carol, let's do 90 seconds with these fellows as our default. Question over on this side, is there one? No? How about the middle? There's a lady there. Go ahead, stand up if you would.
I'm wondering with the really high density that's happening in our city, what are you doing that's mandated about
Okay, high density with respect to new schools. Will there be adequate will there be adequate schools?
Or is it mandated that there's more schools to be built at all?
And is it mandated that more schools accompany denser housing? Tony, you want to go first?
Well, there isn't really a mandate that I'm aware of. The school district is responsible for making sure they have the capacity to teach the kids that come from these housing units. And, you know, I think that the school districts have responded to the increase in density and their planning. They have a ballot measure to raise some revenue in order to make some improvements to their campuses. You know, it's an interesting situation. They sold Pacific View because they felt that they had enough school space for the kids in this community. And, you know, those are decisions that are made by board members. And I trust that they're doing what they need to do in order to be ready to educate kids.
Bruce?
Yeah, I actually thought, oh, you have a question for a different debate. It should be the school board debate, right? Because it's really not our purview to decide whether or not the schools. In fact, each development, when they do go in and get permits, they have to get a letter from the school district that the capacity is served and available. So that's from the degree that we can control it, we let the district actually tell us, do you have the capacity? And so it's really pretty much out of our hands. You know, that said, I think as Tony referred to, the school-age population percentage has been dropping. Our age demographic has been getting older, and so there you saw that we've closed, you know, Pacific View, of course, and so the trend is that we probably have the capacity, I'm assuming, and they're agreeing to it so far. So I'm not sure we answered your question, but like I say, what was that? Okay.
These are great questions, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you all
I would
for
like
these.
to follow up with one,
Yeah, go ahead.
one point, which is that the current situation with our housing here in the city precludes young people with young kids from moving into our town. So it's one of the challenges that we have that we're trying to address. If you have a city that, you know, you can only buy single-family homes for $2.5 million, don't be surprised if young couples don't show up. And so it's really unfortunate that we find ourselves in that position, I think, because one of the things that, to me, is community character is having a vertically integrated community of people that everybody's kind of getting a look at another lifestyle, so to speak.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been campaigning around the city for so many years, for 25 years. I get to go knock on a lot of doors, and I literally walked almost, I think, in every neighborhood in Encinitas. And there are a lot more younger families with kids now. They are starting to come in. So yes, it does cost several $1 million to buy here, but people that have worked very hard, like many of us did, to buy our houses are buying them. And I am seeing families with elementary school-age children. Otherwise, our elementaries would be empty, right? And they are not. But they're not overcrowded, I think, is the point, and there is capacity there. So I don't buy the argument that nobody can afford to live here and no kids can afford to buy here. It is competitive. Our world, our economy is competitive, and we live in a wonderful, beautiful place, and a lot of people want to live here.
Sir?
Dr. Rob Wilder, I live in Manchester, there is a new proposal for what is to be called the preserve, which would have ingress, egress at a blind curve. We've hired an traffic engineering firm. They've confirmed that it fails to meet the minimum 350-foot site distance requirements. I spoke with the developer. He replied, same one who did Fox Point, that density bonus weighs everything. Well, this is not correct. State law says...
Can you put it into a question, please?
Okay, the question is, how do you feel about ingress, egress that is illegal and unsafe?
Particularly with respect to the Manchester.
With respect, yeah, that does not meet ingress, egress requirements.
Well, we can't speak to that project because frankly, we are likely to hear it on appeal, and therefore we would be putting ourselves in a position of having to recuse. I can tell you that density bonus is one of the more frustrating laws because of the ability to waive, request waivers and concessions that do things like you don't have to put in retaining walls that you would normally be required in order to buffer your project from another neighborhood. You don't have to underground utilities. There are a number of things that they can request to be relieved of in order to make it feasible and pencil out, that sort of thing. So what you're talking about sounds like it may be one of those things, but frankly, density bonus law does have a provision in it that addresses it, that gives the council the ability to deny a project based upon health and safety.
Yep.
Bruce, any comments?
Yeah, I'd have to echo the same thing. You don't want us commenting completely, in specifics. So we will talk. I'll talk in generalities. I agree with the comment that we can consider safety, health and safety issues. That is one of the factors that is not waivable. I think Tony talked about waivers and then also about concessions. Concessions are real cost savings that help pay for the low-income housing that's part that they get. Those don't tend to waive this type of stuff. Waivers are about development standards and are limited to that which preclude the achievement of the higher density that they deserve with the bonus. So, but I really should avoid getting into the particulars because otherwise, we pre-communicate our position, and that's violates the due process that the developer and the neighbors are allowed.
It's time for one more quick question before we have questions out on the sidewalk later. Go ahead, stand up if you would, please.
I have a big house sidewalks question. We're putting all our density in lots that come, we are a garden city. So we used to have, we have all these acres that are coming up from greenhouses and putting the density on those. Is there some way along El Real, we have all these old shopping centers. Is there some way to go up and put apartments up there so that people just walk, stores and whatnot? Is that something that could possibly be thrown into the ball wax?
Can we do more of our dense housing along the El Camino Real corridor? Let's do 1 minute each here.
Okay, so I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the couple things. One, there's two new state laws, SB 6, AB 2011, where by right they can go and put housing, R30 housing, on their commercial lots. The height and all can go pretty high, 3-4 stories. It's a function of the road width and the distance, length of. It's a complicated formula. I'll just say that. So right now that can't happen. But I also go back and talk a little bit about in history where we actually considered that back, before Measure T and Measure U, there was actually a couple of subcommittees that looked at putting all of our density along El Camino Real. And then the initial, there was a third thing we considered and recently adopted, but a very different plan. We had what's called a specific plan for El Camino Real, and the original rendition was going to allow for 8,000 additional homes along El Camino Real in the commercial district. That's a 31% increase in our overall population, but all concentrated there. Thankfully, that's not there. However, we were able to take it out, or the city took it out, because the state now allows almost the equivalent. Fortunately, the state also required in that law in AB 2011 SB 6 that they be prevailing wage, and that unfortunately for the developers raises the cost to almost double, and so we'll see how long it goes and whether that actually gets built.
Tony?
Yeah, the specific plan for El Camino Real corridor was originally intended to be the precursor to the potential for housing development there. The number that he used of 8,000 plus was basically a raw calculation of 30 dwelling units per acre times the number of acres. The council, no rational council member would have approved that much housing. There were there were mechanisms we could apply that would throttle that way back, right? So the goal would have been to meet whatever requirements we had for our housing element and call it good. The process of adopting this housing element was, as I mentioned, there were state laws that require that the developers provide something in writing saying they were prepared to develop. The complicated part of a lot of the El Camino Real corridor is that the ownership of those malls and the leases, long-term leases, a lot of things complicated their willingness to sign that letter. So there was not an opportunity for a lot of the El Camino Real corridor development as part of our housing element update.
Great question. Thank you. It's time for closing remarks. Bruce, I believe you're first. Is that correct?
Okay.
Do I remember it correctly?
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank Neil for moderating, and Carol, although it was hard to see you, Carol, down there when the red and yellow switched, so I'm sorry if I overran. And Scott Chatfield for recording the event. It will be available on our websites, so other people can watch it. And I'd also like to thank Alan Largent for letting us use this wonderful historic theater. So, my background and history are well documented on my website and online, so I won't try and squeeze it in here. Please visit my website for more detail. I've told you my top priorities. I'll hit them real quickly. Defend Encinitas against excessive development. Number 2, invest in basic infrastructure first. Number 3, enhance public safety and reduce homelessness. Number 4, protect the environment. 5, improve traffic by keeping it flowing on the main arterials and out of our neighborhoods. And finally, number 6, promote a healthy business environment. Most people accept reasonable growth, but they expect that our community character will be protected by enforcing our zoning laws. They expect that basic essential infrastructure will be fixed first, and they expect chronic homelessness to be reduced. And most importantly, they expect and want to feel safe in their homes and out in public spaces. These are my top goals and my main focus. I hope you'll support my candidacy for mayor of Encinitas, and you can learn more about my background at Bruce for Encinitas. That's Bruce, F-O-R, Encinitas.com. Thank you.
Yes, and I too thank
Tony,
everybody who
closing remarks.
participated in this process. And MayorTony.com has a list of all of my priorities and all the accomplishments that we've managed in the 12 years that I've been serving on the City Council. The pride I take in the fact that we are one of the safest cities in the state is important. Feeling safe is important as well. We will continue to work to accomplish that. Homelessness has been something that we've been working towards eliminating, and I am a firm believer in a woman named Roseanne Haggerty and Community Solutions, which gets us, the goal is functional zero, which unfortunately homelessness cycles, and we will continue to work to get us to the functional zero. We, as a community, continue to work to address the issues related to the affordable housing mandates that are being imposed on us by the city. And we will continue to mitigate as much as we possibly can. And we will continue to be in compliance with state law, because the repercussions of not being in compliance will be drastic and very unfortunate. So I will continue to do the work of serving the community. This is a community that I grew up in, I love dearly, and I can look forward to continuing to serve. And the ultimate goal is to have a place that we can all enjoy. I would also like to mention that I am the only candidate that's been endorsed by the Encinitas Firefighters Association and the Sierra Club, as well as the SEIU 221 and a number of other community members. So looking forward to re-election and continuing to serve.
You know, one of the reasons this is such a great community to live in is we have dedicated public servants like Tony and Bruce. Let's give them a hand for the amount of time they... Remember, La Paloma does have another event, so we do need to clear out. We can continue on the sidewalk. This meeting is adjourned.
Sidewalk brawl.
Yeah.
Yeah, if only we didn't have to read for, we have that darn meeting Wednesday, you know? Got more reading to do.